Lovely to be with you this morning. Each one of you should have received a little slip like this as you were walking in. Over the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, can you fill that out with something? You don't need to put your name on it, but this is going to be important as we kind of bring the message this morning to a close. You may well have had a dream to get married, and you did. Well, that's a good thing to put into the fulfilled dream column. You may have really, really wanted to have a particular career, and it never came out. Maybe that's the unfulfilled dream, or it's yet to be fulfilled. Maybe it's a broken dream, you know it's not going to happen. Over the course of my talking, if you could just put a couple of things in there that are really significant to you, fulfilled and unfulfilled dreams, and then we're going to be doing something with this particular piece of paper towards the end of our message. By the time we reach our 20s, most of us have a dream, don't we? It's human to dream. We might want to become someone. Maybe we want to become an artist or an author. Maybe we want to become a filmmaker. Maybe we want to become a scientist or an engineer. Maybe we want to compete for our country in a particular sport. Maybe we want to achieve something. We want to release the book. We want to release the film. We want to compete for the country. We want to do something that kind of shows that we are human, that makes us who we are. We want to become somebody. We want to achieve something. If I was to talk to your mother, and she was to take me into the lounge room, she'd probably have a very precious bottom drawer that she'd open up, and she'd pull out all the drawings of your childhood. And in those drawings would probably be some of those dreams, because our dreams inspire our drawings as a child. And maybe, like me, in your teen years, those dreams kept you awake at night with excitement when you started to think about what the possibilities could be for you and your life in the future. By the time we reach our 20s, maybe those dreams are starting to define maybe some of the decisions we're making. Are we going to go to university? If so, what course are we going to do? We're going to get married, those kinds of things. And then by the time we reach our 30s and our 40s, we've had an opportunity to see some of those dreams spring to life, or perhaps to have seen some of those dreams die. This is my wife, Merrin. She's smart, she's funny, she's pretty, she's mine. I'll never forget the day in the year 2000 when she walked into the kitchen and she said, "Honey, I think it's time." And being an Australian male, not completely clued onto these things, I said, "Honey, what do you mean? Time for what?" And she said, "Time we started a family." And I said, "What, right now, this moment? Fantastic, let's go." It's going to get worse than that. Okay, just so you know. I'm giving you a heads up, it's going to get worse than that. And it was time. We'd been married 5 years by that stage. We weren't running around from city to city. We were in Perth. And it was a good time. Good time to think about that. Now, any couple that makes that decision knows that from that point on, every 28 days, you're looking for signs of success, aren't you? Right? That's just how it works, right? And it's very common that after the first 28 days, there's expectation. And it's common for there to be disappointment. Next month, expectation, disappointment, and then often expectation, excitement. Well, the pattern for us went expectation, disappointment. Expectation, disappointment. Expectation, disappointment, expectation, disappointment, expectation, disappointment. After 9 months, we went and got some tests done. Those tests revealed that there was a significant problem on my side, and that without either a divine miracle or some sort of technological assistance, our dreamt of child would be very difficult to have. Now, what comes into effect at that point for an infertile couple is a kind of a pendulum swing of emotions. So when the pendulum is up this end, you're thinking about all the kind of positives, the kind of upside of being childless and all of that can bring. So you think about the fact you've got more disposable income, you've got more freedom to travel, you've got more time on your hands. You can go to a cafe on a Saturday morning, you can read page after page after paper, you can sip latte after latte after latte. Mums and dads, you're not feeling just a little bit jealous right now. But it doesn't take long until the pendulum swings the other way and that paternal drive kicks in. That desire to hold your child, a desire to hold a little us. So that starts kicking in for us. And when the pendulum is up this end, we try all sorts of things to try and remedy our situation. We try special diets. We try special supplements. We tried chiropractic, which to this day I cannot work out why. We tried healing prayer. We believe in a God who intervenes miraculously. One particular night in 2003, a bunch of people gathered in the lounge room to pray for us, to pray for me. And as they gathered around me and as they laid hands on me and they started to pray over me, it was as if God walked in the room. out of nowhere, suddenly I begin to cry. Now, Maren and I have been married about 7 years by this stage, and she's never seen me cry, because I'm an Australian male, and we don't cry. But I cry this night, tears coming from I don't know where. And after that night, I'm exhausted, but it feels like something has been freed, released, healed, and so for the next 28 days, there is expectation, followed by disappointment. In 2006, we try our first round of IVF, in vitro fertilization. It took me 2 years to work out the ethics of it from a Christian perspective, and we took a particular line in that, and we went down into the IVF clinic, and it was a very traumatic process on the woman involved, very long needles, very sensitive areas, and 2 hours later, she's in recovery, and then later after that, we're in the taxi, we're heading home. And all our friends and family around Australia, in fact around the world, are praying for us, and there is expectation, 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 and disappointment. In 2007, some friends come round for lunch, and they place into Maren's arms their newborn baby boy. And I'm watching Maren hold this baby boy, and she's gooing and she's scarring and she's doing all the right things that you're supposed to do when you're holding somebody else's child, like say how pretty it is, which is often a lie, because sometimes those things are ugly. But anyway. She's doing all the right things, and I'm looking to myself and I'm thinking, well, she's not kind of, running out of the room in tears. Maybe we're in a good position. Friends go home after lunch, and I go looking around the house for Maren, and I finally find her in our bedroom, sitting on our bed, surrounded by a sea of used tissues. And she looks up at me from her tear-stained eyes, and she says, "Do you think we should try adoption?" 2008, the social worker gets up from our table. She's just finished the last interview of an 8-month process to assess us, to work out whether we are suitable people to look after somebody else's biological child. And as she gets up to go out the door and kind of say goodbye and make her way out, she turns around and she says to me, "I know I shouldn't say this. I know that, I'm a social worker. I'm supposed to keep my feelings to myself, keep it all objective, but I'm going to say this anyway. You're a very attractive couple. I don't think it'll take long until you're placed with a child. Just wait for the phone call." So we wait for the phone call. 1 week passes. It's not going to happen this fast. 2 weeks pass. Expectation. 3, 4, 5 weeks pass. Just be patient, love. It'll come. 2 months pass and no phone call. 4, 6, 8 months pass and no phone call. 10, 12 months pass and no phone call. 14, 16, 18 months and no phone call. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." 19, 20 months, Maren's heart is sick. By 2 years, without a phone call and without any knowledge as to why that's the case, are we just not that good looking to these particular people, or are there just not many children coming through the system at the moment? We just never can know, because that's all confidential. They can't tell us. Maren comes to me with tears in her eyes. She says, "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in this limbo of expectation and disappointment, never knowing when the phone is going to call, if it's even going to ring. And I couldn't do it with IVF. I can't live in this anymore. Can we do something? Psychologically, this is pulling me apart. Can we go and do IVF again?" It's then what we discover that you can't be on the adoption list and do IVF at the same time. And there's good reasons for that, but it means we're in a decision time. We have to let go of either 3 years nearly of investment in this adoption process, and then if we want to come back, we start from scratch. To do IVF that may not work, or we keep waiting for the jolly phone call. In 2010, we decide we'll do this. We will go all out this time. We will do round after round after round until it works. And so, it comes time for our first embryo to be transferred. And by this stage, I'm pointing the finger at myself very heavily. Sheridan, you are the reason your wife cannot have what she desperately wants. And you know what? It's not just your biological fault. Maybe it's your spiritual fault. Maybe you have not been faithful enough. Maybe there's some sort of secret sin. What's stopping the healing from coming? And so around about this time, I decided, well, you know what? Maybe the prosperity preachers are right, and maybe I shouldn't be asking God for something. I should just be commanding a blessing. I shouldn't be asking. I should just be expecting. So I said, well, God, I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to expect that this embryo is going to work into a viable pregnancy, is going to be working out to a child. And so I stand in faith, and I claim, and I do everything that I could possibly can. And there is expectation, 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 disappointment. Next embryo is transferred. Lord, just say the word and your servant will be healed. You know that great prayer of that Roman soldier that Jesus loved? He responded, Lord, just say the word and your servant will be healed and this will happen. Expectation, 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 and disappointment. Another embryo is transferred, another and another. By mid-December of 2010, 10 years after that original conversation in the kitchen, we have one embryo left. And Merrin and I have decided this is it. If this doesn't work, we're not going back to IVF. We're not going to start the whole process of adoption again. There's going to be no more prayers. We've given this 10 years. Our life has been on hold for this amount of time. We need to move on. The embryo is transferred. By this stage, Merrin's faith is shot. I'm exhausted. I've got hardly any prayers left in me. But we have faithful friends and family who pray for us. They're like that story in the Gospel of Mark where there's a bunch of friends that dig a hole, remember, in the ceiling and they lower their crippled friend down. You never hear about the crippled friend having any faith or anything like that, but Jesus heals them because of the friend's faith, and that's what they are like for us. And so because they're praying and because they're kind of believing, they're holding out for us, there is some degree of expectation. 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 And it's followed by a phone call. The phone call is from Emily from the IVF clinic. And she says, it's looking good. And Merrin says, define the word good. Are we talking good? Are we talking good? And Emily says, all your hormone levels are exactly where we'd expect them to be for a pregnancy. Well, can you imagine the elation that starts to erupt amongst our family and friends who've been walking with us for 10 years through this whole journey? They can't believe it. There's tears. They're finding out while they're doing their shopping and they're texting us saying, we're in tears. We can't believe this. After 10 years wait, after praying and fasting and everything else, you're finally going to have your child at the 11th hour. Isn't that just like God? And I discovered that day, friends, that when you tell your mother she's going to become a grandmother, she squeals. It's a great party trick. Try it at lunch today. Nothing that counselling won't solve afterwards. My mum squeals, my dad gives the Voysey victory laugh, reserved for certain family occasions. And there was elation everywhere. And we are living in Sydney at this time. We pack our bags, we drive up to Brisbane to spend Christmas with our families, and on Christmas Eve we get another phone call, and it's Emily from the IVF clinic, and she says to Merrin, I'm so sorry, because there had never been a child. The IVF drugs had created a gestational sac and there was no body in the sac. Even the doctors had been fooled. And at that moment, Merrin puts the phone down, walks into our room, curls up in a fetal position, and that's where our 10-year dream of having a child ended. We didn't feel like celebrating Christmas that much that year. And so late on Christmas Eve, we packed our bags and we started driving back to Sydney. We stopped at a motel in Coffs Harbour. Funnily enough, we couldn't find any rooms in the inns. We found one finally, and we walked in and we dropped the bags on the floor, and Merrin collapsed on the bed in tears. And I pulled out my journal and I wrote these words, God, this is cruel, leaving us in this wilderness. We've walked around in circles for years, tired, empty, confused. One moment we've glimpsed the promised land, and the next moment you've barred us from entering it. I'm going to be honest with you this morning. I'm going to be sharing some of these things that otherwise we wouldn't normally share, because as much as we can come to church and praise God and everything, there are times in which it's kind of hard, right? And you're not too sure what God's doing, right? Anybody else been there? And you're wondering what on earth God is doing. What's your broken dream? Maybe you long to be married and Mr. or Mrs. Right just hasn't come around. Maybe you have longed to have a child like us, or maybe a second child, same grief, by the way. Maybe you have longed for your music to make it to the masses and nobody's downloading your songs off iTunes. Maybe your art hasn't made it out and the career hasn't gone the way that you wanted. Maybe you had the dream career and you lost it. Maybe you had the child and God forbid you lost it. No matter what your broken dream is, if you have been through a broken dream, especially if it's gone on for a period of time, I think you know what I mean by this phrase, the wilderness. See, the wilderness is that barren place between longing and fulfillment. And you walk in circles around between this kind of space, but you never seem to get here to the man or to the woman or to the healing or to the child or to the dream career or whatever it might be that you've been dreaming of for such a long time. And it's a hard place to live, right? In the wilderness. Sometimes it lasts for a long time. Thank God there's more to the wilderness than broken dreams and disappointment. Where did I get that language from? Promised land and wilderness and stuff like that. Come on, you biblical exegetes, you. Got it from the Exodus. Thank you very much. Got it from the Exodus, where 2 million people, 2 million Jews, after 400 years of slavery in Egypt, were set free to go and walk for 40 years in the wilderness before they entered the promised land. Now, a few weeks after we got back to Sydney, we started licking our wounds and started getting our life back in order, started to work out what this life is going to look like now. I sat down and I read that story, and I was surprised at the framework that it put around our experience. It didn't answer all my questions, but it did connect a few dots. So for the rest of the morning, we're just going to explore that story. Now, we've got two options. We can either read the whole of the book of Exodus and half the book of Numbers together to get the story, or it's summarized in a few verses of Deuteronomy chapter 8. Which do you choose? Oh, you want the short one? No, I think Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. Let's begin. Deuteronomy 8. The 40 years of the wilderness wanderings is over. The children of Israel are about to walk into the promised land tomorrow. It's the night before. Moses gets up. He has a few things to say to the children of Israel, and he says them like this. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. For some people, the wilderness is a place of warfare. It's a place where you battle against the principalities and powers, and so you can get your breakthrough. For other people, it's a place of resignation. Broken dreams and heartache and pain and suffering is a part of a broken world, so we just have to kind of resign ourselves to it. Interestingly enough, Moses sees it as neither a place of warfare nor as a place of resignation. He sees it as something else. What was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands? Can I suggest first and foremost, the wilderness is a place of revelation. It reveals something. It reveals what's in our hearts. It reveals the truth. It reveals often things we didn't even know were there. This is a family time slot. We've got a few children around in here. I'm going to speak in code for a moment to see if you understand what I'm talking about. As I mentioned before, there came some time where we had to get some tests done, where I had to get some tests done. And there came a time for me to provide something that they called a sample. Okay, there's about half a dozen people in the middle who understand what I'm talking about, and a whole bunch of people over here have got no idea. Would you like more details? I can give them to you if you like. How are we doing over here? You got it? Are we on the same page? Okay, so I had the opportunity of providing this sample. They gave me two options. I could either duck into the toilet of the IVF clinic. Yeah, it's glorious stuff, isn't it? I could either do that, or the other option was that they could provide a way for which Merrin and I could have what they called a home collection. Same people in the middle know what I'm talking about. How are you doing over here? Would you like more details? I can give them to you. Oh, the guy's going, yeah, okay, no. Now I know what kind of church you guys are. So Merrin and I opted for the home collection, and a little while afterwards, where we were, racing this little specimen jar with its precious contents into the IVF clinic. Remember Merrin was holding it like this. She had it wrapped it up in a jumper to keep it warm, and she was holding it like a precious little chick. And we get to the IVF clinic, and we park over the road from the IVF clinic, and we find ourselves in this ludicrous position. I'm looking at her. She's looking at me. I look at her and she looks at me, and I look at her and I say, "You take it in." And she says, "I'm not taking it in." I said, "Well, I'm not taking it in." And she said, "Well, you have to take it in." I said, "I'm not going to take it in." She said, "I'm not going to take it in. It is yours." I said, "Well, I can't take it in. What do? I walk up to the receptionist and I go, "Hi, this is for you." I'm not taking it in. Well, I'm not taking it in. Just then a lady walked down the footpath. I started winding down the window. I said to Merrin, "If you don't take it in, I'm asking her to take it in." Merrin took it in. It's probably the last time we laughed like that for quite a few years. Little did we know the tests that were going to come into our lives as a result of actually that test. when we discovered what the problem was. And then suddenly we were on this kind of wilderness journey, which we never expected to be on. And friends, we tried so hard to do this thing here, whether or not you would keep his commands. We tried so hard, the beginning of life stuff and making sure that embryos weren't lost and all those kinds of things. We tried our hardest. And I would love to be able to stand here and say that we walked through the wilderness as victorious saints, rejoicing in the Lord right the way through. But if that's the message you're looking forward to, you've got the wrong guy. We didn't. And I've got Marin's permission to read certain aspects of her journal out to you. During this time, Marin is saying things like this. I wish I could trust God in this. I wish that I could trust God has some sort of grand plan for not giving us a child. What can you truly pray for when you've asked with all your heart and you're ignored? God feels like an old friend who no longer returns my phone calls. Or maybe God is just mean. If you read the story from start to finish in Exodus and half of Numbers, you'll find that throughout the wilderness journey, the Jews grumbled and complained and do all sorts of things. And funnily enough, they never doubted God's existence when they're going through the wilderness, but they did doubt his goodness. That's exactly what is going on for Marin during the wilderness. Anybody else been in there? You're not doubting God's existence. There's a God there, but you are wondering if he's good, if he's a father. And so that's happening there. And so could you suggest that maybe what's starting to be revealed, what's starting to come out of Marin's heart is a certain mistrust, a certain lack of trust. Can she really trust God in the midst of this wilderness? We would discover that there was something else in my heart that had to come out, something different. One day we're sitting by the Sydney harbour and we're talking about the future. And Marin says to me, the thought of life going on as normal, if we're not going to have a family, just everything going on as usual, is just too hard for me to contemplate. And I put my arm around her, husband to the rescue, here I am. I said, what would be nice for you, love? What would be a nice consolation prize? She said, I'd like to start again. Okay, start again, right. I'd like to start again overseas. Overseas, okay. Yeah, I'd like to start again overseas in Europe. In Europe? In Europe? You really want to go over yet? You want in Europe? A big dream for Marin was about to be denied. But here was a secondary dream which I had the power to make true, to fulfill for her. But I didn't like the cost. See, here's the irony. During those very same 10 years in the wilderness of infertility, those very same 10 years meant that things were going very, very well for me in terms of ministry and career. Sandra mentioned the open house program. That started in a little dream that I had in 1996 to start up a radio show to explore life, faith, and culture with the Australian mainstream mind. And we would have live music, and it would be nationally networked. We'd have call-ins, we'd have all sorts of things, and we'd be ultimately trying to engage the mainstream mind with the things of faith, and that came to fruition in 2006. And yes, I got to only host it for 5 years, and it kept on going after me, but it got there, and we had 100,000 people. We had 50% of those people not Christian. Everything that I wanted for that show came to fruition. During that same 10 years, I had a dream of writing books, and I started to write books, and they started to sell. During that same 10 years, I had a dream of speaking at conferences. That came about as well. And now Marin wanted me to give it all up. You ask any publisher, there's very little chance of an author being published in a country where they're not known. To have Marin's dream fulfilled, I would have to relinquish my own, and I would again love to say, it was an easy decision. But it was a tough one. See, when you go through the wilderness, you find that there's stuff in your heart you didn't even realize was there. For Marin, it was mistrust. You know what it might have been for me? A little idol of Christian influence. I had an audience. I had people reading my books. I had an opportunity to stand on a stage and speak to members and senators of Australian Parliament House. I was going to let all of that go. And maybe I didn't realize I'd already started to build my sense of identity on those things, which are good, but they're secondary. Reveal a little idol. When you go through the wilderness, what might it reveal of your heart? The wilderness is a place of revelation. It's also a place of something else. So Moses gets up and he has a few other words to say. He gets up and he says these words. I think you're going to need to click it for me. That's not even my slide. Oh, it's a word from God. I've got to change my message. Crazy guy. Thank you. So before, at the beginning of his little talk, he says, in the wilderness, you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a father carries his son. Now he says, know in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Father, son, carries, disciplines. Don't miss these words, friends, because they're really significant. Up to this point in time in the story, the Jews have known God as creator, they've known him as warrior, they've known him as judge, and now they discover him to be something else entirely. They discover him to be father. Now, I don't know about you, but this is significant. Did you know that this is the very first time in Deuteronomy where God reveals himself as Father? The very first time in scriptural history. Now, don't you think it's interesting where he does that? He doesn't do it when times are good. He does it in the wilderness when times are bad. The very time when you and I are probably most likely to doubt that he's a good father. The wilderness turns out to be a place of discovery. The Jews discover God in a whole new way. He is not just Redeemer. He's not just Lord. He's not just Liberator. He is Father, and that means they are his children. So Merrin has this dream. She wants to move overseas. When Merrin started to think that maybe this whole motherhood thing wasn't going to work for her, she started to think about careers, and she took a brave step. She took a brave step to follow her deepest inner desires and dreams career-wise. She did what you and I always wanted to do but never had the bravery to do so. She pursued what was in us that we all have wanted to become. All of us have wanted to become this, but she actually pursued it. She became a statistician. And her field is medical statistics, so she went into medical research and she kind of really started to love it. And she thought maybe Switzerland would be a good place to go to because they've got a lot of pharmaceutical companies and they need people who have her kind of skills. And then we discovered that the Swiss don't like other people. Swiss are beautiful people, but if you're trying to get in there outside of Europe, you're not going to be able to get in there. You've got to have a visa before you get a job. You can't get a job without a visa. Egg and chicken kind of thing. Looked like a second broken dream for Merrin. Then she had an opportunity to do an interview with a little university in England. Somebody knows what's coming. And she had this interview one particular night. It's a very hot summer's night. She was there. She hadn't opened the window. And so she's doing this interview for like 30, 40 minutes, and it's getting hotter and hotter, and the perspiration is streaming down her face. And they're asking her questions about parametric sample sizes and all those kinds of things that are the tools of her trade. And she comes out afterwards, and I say, how did it go? She says, I don't think it went very well at all. I said, when do you find out? She said, they said they were going to get back to me in 2 weeks. Next day, I get a phone call from Merrin. She says, I've got an email from the interview panel. And I say, fantastic. What does it say? She says, I don't know. I haven't read it. Do you think I should? Yes, of course you should. She opens it up and she says, okay, what does it say here? We are pleased to offer you the position of medical statistician at the Centre for Statistics in Medicine at Oxford University. Yeah, half of you did it. The rest of you are supposed to join in. So that's where you go, oh. All right, let's try it again. At Oxford University. Exactly. Let's do it again. Oxford University. Have I ever told you my wife works at Oxford University? That's what everybody says. So she had this wonderful opportunity, and very soon we're clasping our belts in at the airport and we're flying off to our new home of Oxford. Friends, this is where John Wesley was kicked out of the Anglican Church to start the Methodist Church. I know, it's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool. C.S. Lewis wrote the Narnia Chronicles in a little house just up the road and around the corner from me, okay? I'm just saying. Actually, it's a little bit further than that, but anyway. J.R. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings just a suburb away in his house, just from me. I'm just saying, don't feel jealous at all. And so we arrive at this new place of Oxford, and we start to get used to this 1,000-year-old buildings and this amazing university that we're surrounded by. Comes the first day for Merrin to start her job at Oxford University. She's bought a new outfit, because that's what you do, ladies, right? And she comes down the stairs, and she says, how do I look? And I look her up and down, and I say, my dear, when those medical statisticians see you in the office today, they are going to spill their weak tea all down their beige cardigans. But she's anxious. We've come a long way for this not to work. But she comes home with a smile. And in fact, she continues to come home with a smile. It's no replacement for a child. But what's the second part of Proverbs 13:12? Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life. And it's the tree of life she needs. So as the months roll on, for Merrin, coming to Oxford is like leaving the wilderness and entering the promised land. And for me, coming to Oxford is like leaving the wilderness and entering a whole new wilderness. Well-connected people are kind of putting my name forward to the BBC, but the BBC aren't returning my phone calls. Nobody's asking me to speak at their conferences. I think I've got a really winning book idea, and I take it to not one but two publishers, and they turn me down. Why? Who's Sheridan Voysey? We've never heard of him. One actually said, come back to us when you're famous. And very soon, feelings started to arise within me that I never even knew were there. I knew I was capable of them, but I didn't know they were there. A sense of depression about what I'd lost, a sense of jealousy for those who had what I used to have, a sense of envy for those who had what I'd never had. Jealousy and envy, and it was so ugly, friends. I had it in here, and it was coming out. And a little voice whispered to me around about that time, you used to be listened to by thousands, Sheridan. Now nobody cares what you have to say. You're washed up, you're spiritually impotent, you're over, you're done, you're finished. Whose voice was that? What happens, friends, is when we go through the wilderness, we are stripped of all the good but secondary identities most of us build our lives on. So I'm asking you this morning, who are you if you cannot become the mum that you want to become? Who are you if you never get married, you never are called husband? Who are you if the career never works out? Who are you if nobody ever downloads your music off iTunes the way you want them to? Who are you if your art never makes it to the masses? Who are you if you never become the engineer you want or the chemist you want or the sports person that you want to be? Who are you, Sheridan, if nobody ever publishes a word that you write again? Who are you, Sheridan, if nobody ever invites you to host a radio show again? Who are you, Sheridan, if you're never invited to speak on a platform again? Who are you? Who are you? Is there anything more foundational, anything more substantial beneath all of those identities that we can build our lives on? Read the words of Moses again. As a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. As a father carries his son, he carried you. This is what's left. This is what's left when you go through the wilderness and all the secondary identities are stripped away from you. You are a son. You are a daughter. You are a child of God. Now tell me one thing that can take that away from you.
Nothing.
Unemployment? Sickness? Failure? Death? How great is the love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God. And that's what we are. Friends, I'd written about this. I preached it. I thought I knew it. When you go through the wilderness, you discover how deep that truth has gone in. And I found that it had probably gone about this far. And it needed to go this far and go through the whole of my being. And this is what happens when you go through the wilderness. You discover who you most truly, deeply are, a child of God. Are you with me? Maybe you're not. Because maybe I would have been sitting there saying, yes, I'm with you, Sheridan. And I'd only thought it. It's a place of revelation. It's a place of discovery. He's got one more thing to say. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. He's bringing you into a good land. It's a place of revelation. It's a place of discovery. And then the Jews find out it's also a place of transition. After 40 years in the wilderness, they enter the promised land. After 40 days in the wilderness, Jesus comes back and he starts his world-changing mission. And this is good news for those of us who've lost the dream or gone through the wilderness. After the wilderness comes a new beginning. So we get used to this new place of Oxford. We start going and seeing the wonderful things that have happened all around our place, full of history. We drive up to Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare was born, and we head to all these different places where these famous people lived. And we took an opportunity that a friend had given me to come and spend a weekend with them. You might know who this person is. His name is Adrian Plass. Anybody read any Adrian Plass books? Sacred Diary of Adrian Plass, aged 37 3/4, was his famous book. He reminds me that it's rapidly out of date now. He's no longer 37 3/4. Adrian is the kind of guy who, when he asks you how you're doing, he actually wants to hear the answer. And around about December of 2010, just before that phone call had come, he had asked me off air on an interview with Open House. He had actually asked, "How are you doing, Sheridan?" when we'd been talking off air. And I told him where we were up to. And he said, "If you ever come to the UK, we would like you to stay with us, and we would like to pamper you, and we'd like to look after you." When you're in radio, you get a lot of offers like that. It's kind of, "Yeah, dude, yeah, when you come in through LA, look me up. Yeah, sure." It's just another way of saying goodbye, really. And Adrian meant it, and so we went up to North Yorkshire with its rolling hills and dry stone walls and all this lovely English prettiness. And we ended up spending a weekend with Adrian and his wife, Bridget. And over that weekend, the story comes out. One afternoon, we're walking in this park. Merrin and Bridget walk up kind of ahead of us, and then Adrian and I are kind of just lagging behind. And Adrian says, "So how are you doing now? It's been a few months since you've been in the UK. How are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, Adrian, I think we're doing okay. The new job for Merrin's been wonderful. She still gets a bit teary at times, but the time between the tears is getting longer, so I think there's healing there. Things are a bit up in the air for me. I'm not too sure where I'm going, but I guess just trust God with that." I guess, Adrian, what we're trying to do is look at the upside of being childless. There's more disposable income. We've got more freedom to travel. We can sit in a cafe on a Saturday morning, drinking latte after latte, reading page after page of the paper. And Adrian says, "I understand that, but that can only take you so far." He says, "Sheridan, think about the cross. Think about the crucifixion. No matter which way we look at it, no matter which way we spin it, we can't put a positive spin. We can't see the upside in what was a brutal and barbaric event. And Jesus didn't try to do that. He wasn't looking for an upside in the crucifixion. Sheridan, Jesus was trying to do something completely different to that." Now he had my attention. He said, "Sheridan, have you noticed how many people Jesus ministered to while he hung on the cross?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you think about it. Remember, Mary, his mother, is standing there right before him, and so is his friend John. And he says, 'Mother, here is your son. Son, here is your mother.' He's looking after his mother's well-being as she gets old while he's hanging on the cross. Not bad, huh?" He said, "Sheridan, think about the people that were crucifying him. What did he say? 'Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do.' Think about the thief that was crucified next to him. What did he say? 'Today you will be with me in paradise.' What about the Roman centurion who had this revelation? Surely this was the Son of God. He was ministering to him in some kind of miraculous, supernatural way. And Sheridan, just while he's hanging on the cross, Jesus is paying the penalty for our sins, being the sacrifice for our sins. He's ministering to us. Get this, Sheridan, all of this is happening on the cross, during the crucifixion, before things come good at the resurrection." Now, I don't know about you, but I hadn't seen that before. Because maybe you're like me and you kind of go, when you're going through a tough time, you go, "Wow, when I get through this, what a testimony it's going to be. What a ministry is going to happen after I get through this wilderness, after I get through this tough time, after I get through this crucifixion." And Adrian was reminding me, no, now, in the midst of the wilderness, in the midst of the broken dream, in the midst of the pain and the suffering, that's where the ministry comes out. Yes, Sheridan, there'll be some upsides to you not having children, but some days you're going to feel cold and empty and lonely, and it's going to feel excruciating. But if you let him, God will use this suffering and provide an opportunity for you to serve other people through it in ways that you otherwise never could. Later that night, we're sitting in his lounge room by a roaring fire, sipping port. How English can you get? And we're talking about my failed writing career and how it's not going anywhere. Out of the blue, Adrian says, "Have you thought about writing your story into a book?" And I said, "Which story is that?" Can you believe it? I couldn't even see it. He said, "The story you've told us this weekend, the conversation in the kitchen in year 2000, and the prayer meeting in 2003, and the IVF attempt in 2006, and the adoption attempt in 2008, and then the phone call on Christmas Eve in 2010, all of that." I said, "What do you mean, like a memoir?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh. For a start, Adrian, I don't want to be known as the infertility guy. That's not the brand I want. And besides, Adrian, I'm not qualified to write a book on infertility. There's medical people that can do that." And Adrian says, "Your story isn't about infertility. Your story is about broken dreams and starting again. Your story is about holding on to God when you don't understand him. Your story is about leaving the past behind and moving to a new future you don't even know what's about. I know a lot of people who could benefit from reading a story like that." I don't sleep that night thinking about the idea. I'm pretty sure my wife, Merrin, who's private, wasn't going to be keen on going public with our story. She goes away and prays about it. She comes back, she says, "I think you're supposed to do this." And a few days after that book is released into the world, I start getting emails like this. My son has Asperger's and my marriage is in tatters because of my husband's addiction. All my dreams are gone, but I've just read Resurrection Year, and now I can start again, and I can start finding God again. This one. My child was stillborn. Now my husband has asked for a divorce. Thank you for sharing your story with such vulnerability. I'm tired of hearing Christian success stories. Friends, we get that all the time. 300 odd letters now that I've received from Resurrection Year readers. And the amount of people who say, I just can't handle another book that tells me about a miracle ending. Friends, I believe in an intervening God who does the miraculous, and if we were going to canvass you, I reckon it wouldn't take long before you'd be telling me about a miracle story that you've experienced. But for every miracle, there's a whole 10, 20, 30, maybe 100 people who don't get the miracle. And if all we ever share from the stages in our churches is just the miracle story, there's a whole bunch of people who live there, often without mentioning a word about it, and feel completely and utterly ripped apart and feel like they're cursed of God at the very worst, at the very least, forgotten by God. But is there not another way to look at it? Yes, we believe in an intervening, miracle-making God, but we also believe in a God who let Jesus die on the cross for a greater cause and then resurrected him, bringing him to new life, which he says he will do with us, because we follow a God of redemption, not just rescue. We follow a God of redemption, not just rescue. He takes the rubbish, the junk, and he turns it into a beauty that otherwise could not have happened without the rubbish and the junk. So my friends, it's time. I'll ask the band to come up and we'll just kind of land this. That little piece of paper that you've got there. If you've already written a dream that's fulfilled and a dream that is unfulfilled, then now's the time for us to use it. If you haven't, then now's the time to scribble it down. As the band come up and play, and as we kind of move into this prayerful time, we're just going to do something really, really simple with this. You see that a couple of crosses have been set up on the stage here. Do you remember Abraham and the story of God calling him to sacrifice Isaac? Have you ever wondered what on earth was that all about? Do you remember that Abraham had been given two promises by God? One, he would have his own child. Wouldn't be his cousin or somebody else that would receive his inheritance. No, he'd have his own child. Isaac was the symbol of a fulfilled dream. But the promise was much bigger than that. You won't just have one son, you will have a whole nation. And in fact, look up at the sky. Can you count the number of stars? That's how many you're going to have. You're going to have a whole nation of people. So Isaac was actually a symbol of the unfulfilled dream. And God is saying, give me the dream, give me the unfulfilled dream, I want it back. And so what Abraham is called to do is lay those dreams on the altar. Hand them over. The risk is, if God is who he says he is, he has every right to keep the dream. Every right to not give us the unfulfilled dream. But as you know the story, just as he's about to do the thing, God jumps in and says, no, I now know you trust me more than you place your whole trust in this little baby boy, as much as you place your trust in everything else, the circumstances around you. Now I know you've trusted me with your one and only son. I'm asking you this morning, will you trust God with your very precious dreams, the fulfilled ones and the unfulfilled ones, giving them over to him? A dream fulfilled became an idol for me. May it not become an idol for you. An unfulfilled dream becomes an idol for many. May it not become an idol for you. A greater tragedy than a broken dream is a dream that defines your life forevermore. Here's a time to hand it over. So we're just going to go into a time of very quiet worship and prayerfully. If you're ready, if you want to, you can just simply come and prayerfully say, this is yours. This is yours. And so in Jesus' name, I ask that you would move by us and through us, in us by your Holy Spirit, Lord, that you would work powerfully in our lives now, that we might give our dreams, the precious things that are very part of our humanity, and pass them back over to you, Lord. The fulfilled, gosh, we're really grateful for the fulfilled ones. And the unfulfilled, Lord, we hunger for them, we long for them, we don't quite understand why in some cases we haven't got them yet, but we're going to give them over to you, Lord, for you to do with as you wish. We commit them to you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Whenever you're ready, if you're ready, come along and pass your dreams over.